There was a time when the Smith family was Hollywood. Will Smith was the king of charisma, Jada was the queen of cool, and their kids, Jaden and Willow, were seen as the next generation of talent. They were the family everyone wanted to be. The picture-perfect brand of fame, fortune, and flawless PR. But fame doesn't last forever, especially when the whole world's watching your every mistake. Because today, that same family that once symbolized success has become the internet's favorite cautionary tale. A family so obsessed with image that they turned their entire lives into content, and in the process, lost everything that made them human. From a slap that shook the Oscars, to fake AI crowds, to castle hats at the Grammys. What happened to the Smiths isn't just another celebrity meltdown. It's a mirror showing what fame does when it eats itself alive. So, how did Hollywood's most powerful family go from inspiring the world to becoming the punchline of it? This is the tragic, bizarre, and unbelievable downfall of the Smiths, and how the pursuit of attention turned them from icons into irony. Let's start with the man who built it all, and lost it just as fast. But every empire has a breaking point. And for the Smiths, it didn't start with Jaden's weird interviews or Jada's oversharing. It started with one moment that nobody can forget. A single slap that cracked open the perfect image Hollywood had spent decades polishing. From that night on, nothing was the same. Because when Will Smith, the world's most likable man, walked on stage and let his anger speak louder than his legacy, the entire illusion collapsed. And what came next would expose just how far a fallen king would go to win his crown back. There was a time when Will Smith could do no wrong. The man had it all: charm, money, talent, and a smile so confident it could sell you bottled air. He was Hollywood's golden boy, a living meme of success and charisma. But then came that night. The Oscars. The slap heard around the world, and the start of a collapse that no one saw coming. That single moment, one impulsive act, flipped decades of fame into a lifetime of public humiliation. It was like watching a superhero punch himself in the face on live TV. And since then, Will's been stuck in an endless loop of trying to fix an image that might be permanently broken. After the slap, he disappeared. No big projects, no interviews, no charm left to sell. But instead of laying low and rebuilding quietly, Will did what every desperate celebrity does when Hollywood stops calling. He tried to reinvent himself as a rapper again, and that's where things went downhill fast. In June 2025, he dropped Pretty Girls, a song so cringe it made people nostalgic for his Wild Wild West era. It starts with Will sitting in a therapist's office confessing his problem, that he likes attractive women. And yes, that's the actual premise. A 50-something man with a shattered image, a broken marriage, and a desperate need for validation. Rapping about flavors of women like it's 1998. Vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, lemon. Dude turned therapy into an ice cream commercial. The internet destroyed him. TikTok tore it apart. Reddit called it the thirst anthem for midlife crises. Even major outlets joined in. Pitchfork gave the album a 2.4 out of 10 and described it as a pointless apology tour disguised as music. Rolling Stone called it a clunky mix of gospel and cringe. The Independent said it sounded quasi-inspirational, but emotionally dead. When even critics who used to praise you start roasting your soul, you know the fall off is real. But the reviews were just the beginning. The real pain came when the numbers dropped. His album didn't just underperform, it evaporated. Didn't chart on Billboard, didn't trend. In the UK, it sold 268 copies in the first week. That's not a typo. 268. That's like one high school auditorium. Local indie bands move more merch on accident. And if you thought that was the bottom, oh, it gets worse. To promote the album, Will performed at King's Cross Station in London. But the crowd wasn't cheering. They weren't even moving. Imagine trying to hype people up while they just stare at you like NPCs in a broken video game. It looked less like a concert and more like performance art about embarrassment. But Will wasn't done embarrassing himself. A couple months later, he posted a clip from his European tour. Massive cheering crowds, lights flashing, fans going wild. Except, people noticed something was off. Faces looked weird. Hands didn't bend right. Movements were glitchy. It wasn't real. The crowd was AI generated. Yup, Will Smith, one of the biggest movie stars in history, was out here faking his fans with artificial intelligence. The comments were brutal. Imagine being this rich and still needing fake people to like you. Bro really generated his own self-esteem. And the craziest part? The whole tour had to be scaled down because of how bad everything flopped. Instead of selling out arenas, he ended up performing in small-town venues across Europe, places like Scarborough and Wolverhampton. Let that sink in. The guy who once packed stadiums across the globe was now pretending to have fans in a town where the local Tesco probably gets more traffic. This was no longer the Fresh Prince. This was the fallen king, trying to hold onto a throne that didn't exist anymore. But the truth is, Will's music wasn't the real problem. It was a symptom, a desperate attempt to feel relevant again in a world that had already moved on. The same charisma that made him famous was now the thing people mocked. The forced smiles, the look at me bounce back energy, the fake optimism. Because beneath it all, you can feel it. The man's exhausted. Decades of being perfect finally caught up with him. And instead of healing, he tried to perform the healing. Instead of finding peace, he tried to sell it. But Will wasn't the only one crumbling. While he was out there rapping about pretty girls and pretending his AI fans loved him, someone else in the Smith family was writing a whole new chapter in the family downfall, one that would make Will's PR disasters look tame. And that someone was Jada. While Will was out here faking crowd reactions and pretending his rap career still mattered, Jada was doing something even worse, turning her family's pain into content. For years, she branded herself as this modern-day philosopher, spiritual, self-aware, unbothered. But behind the calm tone and deep quotes, she was fueling the fire that burned her family's image to the ground. It all started with one of the biggest shockers in celebrity history. In October 2023, during the press tour for her book, Worthy, Jada casually dropped a bomb that rewrote the entire Oscar slap narrative. She revealed that she and Will had actually been separated since 2016. Meaning, when Will stormed that stage and screamed, "Keep my wife's name out your mouth," he was defending someone who wasn't technically his wife. Let that sink in. The most famous public defense of a marriage in decades was a performance. They'd been living separate lives for 7 years. But for the cameras, the red carpets, the brand deals, they kept up the act. Because in Hollywood, authenticity doesn't sell. Marketable pain does. And Jada knew that better than anyone. Her book, Worthy, was supposed to be a redemption story. A woman reclaiming her power after years of scrutiny. But instead, it became one of the biggest PR disasters in recent memory. Critics called it self-absorbed, poorly written, and a masterclass in oversharing. One review literally said, "There's nothing new here, just old wounds repackaged for profit." Even Saturday Night Live roasted her rollout. Social media called it the Jada Pinkett fatigue era. People were just tired. Tired of hearing every private detail, every breakup confession, every overanalyzed quote that sounded deep but meant nothing. And honestly, they had a point. Because Jada didn't just share her truth. She monetized it. She turned her marriage, her trauma, her family's private breakdowns into viral talking points. And the biggest platform for that oversharing? Red Table Talk. When the show first launched, it was pitched as this raw, honest space for healing. But over time, it turned into a public therapy session that nobody asked to sit in on. And the most infamous episode? The entanglement. Jada sat across from Will, admitted to an affair with her son's 27-year-old friend, and called it an entanglement. The clip of Will sitting there, trying to smile while looking completely broken, became one of the most viral memes of the decade. That one frame, the watery eyes, the forced grin, perfectly captured everything wrong with their relationship. And here's the thing. Decades ago, stars guarded their privacy like gold. They were mysterious. larger than life. But Jada flipped that script. She made oversharing the brand. And what used to make her relatable eventually made everyone uncomfortable. Because when every tear, every argument, every confession becomes content, what's left that's real? The more Jada talked, the more detached she seemed. Every interview turned into a therapy monologue. Every revelation was marketed like a trailer for her next project. She didn't just break the fourth wall, she lived in it. And while all this was happening, the empire that Will and Jada built together, their media company, Westbrook Incorporated, was quietly bleeding out. Before the slap, Westbrook was pulling in around $170 million a year. After the scandal, it dropped to just $100 million. They laid off half their staff. Major deals vanished. To most people, that's still huge money. But for the Smiths, it was proof that the world wasn't buying what they were selling anymore. And that's when it hit. The family that once felt like royalty had become reality TV. They didn't need paparazzi. They were broadcasting their own downfall for free. But while Jada was busy turning heartbreak into headlines, her kids were living in a whole different dimension. A place where castles sit on heads, Instagram meltdowns turn into art, and deep quotes sound like they were written by ChatGPT on acid. While Jada was busy turning personal pain into publicity, the Smith family's biggest empire, their brand, was quietly collapsing behind the scenes. For years, Will and Jada weren't just Hollywood stars. They were an entire business. They had movies, talk shows, book deals, and even their own production company, Westbrook Incorporated. It was supposed to be the crown jewel, the symbol of their creative power, family unity, and financial dominance. But after the slap, that empire started crumbling fast. Before 2022, Westbrook was pulling in close to $170 million a year. They'd even turned down a $600 million buyout offer. That's how untouchable they thought they were. But the moment Will's hand connected with Chris Rock's face, everything changed. By 2023, Westbrook's revenue dropped to around $100 million. Half their staff was laid off. Major brand partnerships, gone. Hollywood studios didn't want to touch them. Sponsors ghosted them. Projects were postponed indefinitely, which is Hollywood code for "we're done here." And Will Smith, the man who once sold out box offices just by showing up, became a risk. No one wanted to cast him. No one wanted to work with him. Not because he lost his talent, but because he lost his likability. In Hollywood, that's worse than losing your career. It means losing your power. The man who used to be Mr. Family Friendly had become a walking controversy. He wasn't a brand anymore. He was a liability. It's wild when you think about it. One moment, he's standing on stage with an Oscar, the peak of his career. The next, he's being treated like a social experiment in how fast public favor can vanish. And through all this chaos, the Smith family tried to do what they always did best: turn the pain into PR. Every crisis became content. Every backlash became an interview. Every humiliation became a learning moment. They couldn't stop performing, even while their empire was burning. Instead of laying low and rebuilding quietly, Will jumped on podcasts talking about healing. Jada went on tour promoting her book about truth, and every public appearance, every headline, just reminded people of how fake the whole thing felt. It stopped being about redemption and started looking like addiction, an addiction to being seen. Because once you've built your entire identity around fame, disappearing feels like death. The saddest part? They didn't just lose money or respect. They lost control of their own story. The same media machine that once worshipped them was now dissecting every move, every quote, every awkward facial expression. The empire they built to amplify their voices became the megaphone that broadcasted their downfall. And that's when the spotlight shifted to the next generation, Jaden and Willow. Two kids born into the machine, raised by fame, and now struggling to figure out who they are without it. Because when you grow up watching your parents turn trauma into entertainment, how do you even begin to live a normal life? And for the Smith kids, things were about to get even stranger, Because the next generation of Smiths didn't just inherit fame, they inherited the chaos, and none of them embodied that more than Jaden. If Will was the fallen king and Jada the queen of oversharing, then Jaden became something else entirely. The philosopher prince of delusion. He grew up surrounded by fame, money, and cameras. Every move was watched, every thought broadcast. So it's no surprise he turned out a little different. But Jaden didn't just want to be famous. He wanted to be important. He wanted to sound deep, to be seen as this futuristic thinker, a young sage trapped in a celebrity body. And that's where the story of The Castle begins. At the 2025 Grammy Awards, Jaden walked in wearing what looked like a literal castle on his head. The $4,600 piece was called the Vampire Castle, designed by an avant-garde artist who claimed to descend from nobility. But instead of inspiring admiration, it became one of the most roasted moments of the night. Twitter called it the peak of Nepo baby fashion. TikTok turned it into a meme overnight. When your ego needs its own real estate. The castle wasn't just a bad outfit. It was a metaphor for Jaden himself. A kid living in a fortress of fame, completely disconnected from the real world. And that disconnect showed up everywhere. In late 2024, Jaden was named Christian Louboutin's first men's creative director, sparking massive backlash online. People saw it for what it was, nepotism at its most obvious. Thousands of talented designers grind for years to even intern in the fashion world, and Jaden walks in because his last name is Smith. The comment sections were brutal. Bro was born in the VIP section of life. Of course he's creative director. His dad directed his whole existence. It was the same old Hollywood story, privilege pretending to be purpose. But the truth is, this wasn't new behavior. Jaden had been giving main character energy long before anyone called him out. Remember that infamous clip from years back where he complained that kids his age didn't want to talk about the political and economic state of the world? Yeah, the internet never forgot. People roasted him endlessly. One meme showed SpongeBob crying with the caption, "Jaden Smith when his kindergarten classmates don't want to discuss the economy of Mesopotamia." Another said, "Jaden on his way to cancel nap time for not being socially conscious enough." It became a running joke. The guy who thought too deeply about everything. Except himself. But what's sad is, underneath all the memes, you can actually see the damage. Because Jaden didn't choose fame. He was born into it. He never had a real childhood. Every part of his identity, his music, his fashion, even his philosophy, was built under the same spotlight that destroyed his parents. So when he tries to sound wise, what you're really hearing is a kid who never got to be one. His music reflects that too. In 2024, he released 2024, a case study on the long-term effects of young love. Even the title sounded like a college essay written by a robot in therapy. He told the press he made it because I'm sad. And yeah, it's honest, but it's also painfully ironic. Because the sadness he's talking about is the kind that comes from being raised in a family that turned feelings into marketing. The public might laugh at Jaden's weird outfits or his deep tweets, but it's also hard not to feel a little sorry for him. He's trapped between two worlds, one built by his parents' fame and one that doesn't actually exist outside social media validation. And you can tell how lost he is by how he tries to define himself. One day, he's a philosopher. The next, a designer. Then a rapper. Then an activist. But through it all, there's this sense that he's still searching for something real. Something that doesn't come with brand deals or family names attached. And maybe that's why his most viral moment wasn't a song or a fashion show. It was a tweet. After Will slapped Chris Rock, Jaden tweeted, "And that's how we do it." One line, 5 words. The perfect summary of the Smith family's biggest problem. They don't fix issues, they perform them. But while Jaden's been trying to find meaning in a world that only sees him as a meme, his sister Willow has been fighting her own battles. And hers might be even messier. Because if Jaden is the philosopher prince, then Willow might just be the family's fallen angel. If Jaden is the philosopher lost in his own thoughts, Willow is the artist lost in her own feelings. But somewhere along the way, those feelings stopped being relatable and started looking like performance art for the internet. For years, Willow was the cool one, the spiritual one, the chill, wise beyond her years daughter who turned heartbreak into poetry and pain into music. But lately, even her fans have started to ask, what happened? It all started in August 2025, when Willow posted a crying selfie on Instagram. Not just a teary-eyed photo, a full breakdown moment with an explicit caption that instantly blew up online. The backlash was massive. Some fans were worried, others called it emotional clickbait, and instead of quietly moving on, Willow doubled down. She responded with a message that perfectly captured the Smith family curse, that inability to ever take a loss quietly. She wrote, "Y'all DMN so dense, y'all forgot funny existing." Translation, if you didn't get her pain, it's because you're too dumb to understand her genius. A classic Smith move. When the world calls you out, blame the world for not keeping up. And that wasn't even the worst of it. A few months later, Willow released her debut novel, Black Shield Maiden, a story that was supposed to celebrate powerful women of color. Except there was one massive problem. The book described Muslim North Africans as dangerous on their best day, and always at war. Yeah, that didn't go over well. Hollywood, the press, and her own audience called it out immediately. Accusations of cultural insensitivity, ignorance, and hypocrisy exploded across social media. Because here's the thing, Willow had spent years branding herself as this hyper-aware, spiritually conscious advocate for marginalized communities. But when it came time to show it through her own art, she missed the mark completely. The irony was painful. The same people who once called her the next generation of woke were now calling her tone deaf with a guitar. And it's hard not to see the pattern. The Smith family built their empire on being different, being real, being enlightened. But the more they tried to prove it, the more fake it started to feel. Willow's music, once celebrated for its honesty, started getting the same criticism her mom's talk show did. Overexposed, overanalyzed, and exhausting. Every interview sounded like a self-help podcast. Every quote was a riddle wrapped in a hashtag. She once said, "I don't want to be understood. I want to be felt." And while that sounds poetic, it also sums up the problem. The Smiths stopped trying to connect with people. They started performing emotions for them. But behind the weird captions, failed books, and chaotic social posts, there's something deeper going on with Willow. Something you can't really roast. She's clearly hurting, and it's hard not to see why. Imagine growing up in a family where vulnerability isn't just personal, it's profitable. Where your mom turns heartbreak into interviews, your dad turns pain into rap lyrics, and the internet treats every one of your emotions like entertainment. You'd probably lose your balance too, because that's what's happened to Willow. She's not a villain, she's a byproduct of a family that doesn't know how to process pain without packaging it. Every time she tries to express herself, it gets filtered through that Hollywood lens, that constant need to be deep, to be different, to be seen. And maybe that's why every move she makes feels like performance art, because in the Smith family, being normal was never an option. But here's the thing. While Jaden and Willow are each living their own chaos, they're not the cause of the downfall. They're the result. Because when fame becomes the family business, it stops being about love and starts being about legacy. And for the Smiths, that legacy wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. But the truth is, this wasn't just about bad songs, awkward interviews, or viral memes. The Smiths' downfall wasn't random, it was inevitable. Because what we're really watching isn't just a family in chaos. It's what happens when fame becomes a family curse. By this point, it's pretty clear. Every member of the Smith family is fighting their own personal battle. But what makes their story tragic isn't what happened to them. It's why it happened. Because none of this, the fake crowds, the awkward oversharing, the castle hats, is random. It's the byproduct of fame being passed down like a family heirloom. For the Smiths, fame wasn't a dream. It was destiny. Will built it, Jada maintained it, and their kids inherited it, whether they wanted it or not, and that's the curse. When you're born into the spotlight, you don't get to discover who you are. The world decides for you. Every mistake becomes a headline. Every thought becomes a quote. Every emotion becomes content. It's a different kind of prison, one that doesn't have bars, just followers. Think about it. Will spent years being the ultimate people pleaser, the hero, the nice guy, the icon of positivity. So when he finally snapped at the Oscars, it wasn't just anger. It was 20 years of bottled up image management exploding in one slap. Jada. She turned her trauma into a brand. Every revelation, every heartbreak turned into a chapter, a soundbite, a meme. And after a while, even she couldn't tell the difference between authenticity and attention. Then came the kids. Born into chaos, raised on camera, and expected to be both famous and authentic in a world that rewards neither. It's no wonder Jaden ended up wearing castles, and Willow ended up crying on Instagram. Because when your parents sell vulnerability for views, how do you learn what privacy even means? The Smiths didn't just lose their reputation, they lost the line between real life and performance. Everything they touched had to be public, polished, on brand. Even their pain had a filter. That's the irony of the whole thing. The family that preached self-expression became trapped in their own image. They built an empire on openness and ended up being consumed by it. And you can see it in every move they make. Will's fake AI crowds? That's not just desperation. That's a man trying to recreate the love he can't feel anymore. Jada's endless interviews? That's not confidence. That's control. It's easier to narrate your own downfall than to admit you're powerless in it. And the kids? They're just mirroring the only version of reality they've ever known. This is what happens when fame replaces family. When how we look becomes more important than who we are. And once that happens, there's no going back. Because the Smiths didn't just live in Hollywood, they became Hollywood, and Hollywood always eats its own. But here's the twist. Their story doesn't just expose them, it exposes us. Because deep down, we helped build this. We're the ones who turned celebrity breakdowns into entertainment. We clicked, we watched, we laughed, we made memes. We wanted them to be open until they were too open. We wanted authenticity until it got uncomfortable. And now, we're watching the aftermath of what happens when a family gives us everything and ends up with nothing. But this isn't the end of the story. Because what happened to the Smiths isn't just a celebrity scandal. It's a warning. A look at what happens when fame stops being a reward and becomes your entire identity. By now, the Smith family's story sounds less like a series of scandals and more like a prophecy. Because what happened to them isn't just about bad decisions. It's about what happens when fame becomes survival. Hollywood loves to build idols, and it loves tearing them down even more. It's the same cycle every time. Fame, peak, scandal, meltdown, apology tour, redemption attempt, repeat. But the Smiths didn't just play the game. They became the entire rulebook. They were the original blueprint for modern celebrity culture. Will was the perfect, smiling face of family-friendly fame. Jada was the voice of self-love and emotional healing. Their kids were the proof that you could raise enlightened, creative children in the spotlight. It was a perfect story, until the audience stopped believing in it. Because in the age of the internet, people can smell inauthenticity from a mile away. Once the slap happened, the mask cracked, and everyone saw what was underneath. A family that wasn't just human, but hurt. A group of people who had spent so long performing perfection that they forgot how to be imperfect in private. And that's what made their downfall so captivating. It felt real. For once, we weren't watching a Hollywood fantasy. We were watching the collapse of one. The Smiths became a case study for everything wrong with modern fame. The pressure to always appear strong. The illusion of being relatable while living completely disconnected lives. The belief that vulnerability equals engagement. But maybe the most haunting part of their story is that it's not unique anymore. Because now, everyone, from influencers to random TikTokers, is living their own mini version of it. Everyone's performing, curating, oversharing, begging to be seen. The Smiths were just the first to fall on a public scale. The first to show what happens when your identity becomes your brand. And it's weirdly poetic. Will spent decades teaching people how to be likable. Jada taught people how to be open. Their kids taught people how to find themselves. But in the end, none of them could live by their own lessons. What we're seeing now is the cost of constant exposure, when every confession, every song, every tear becomes another piece of content for people to dissect. They built a glass house and then wondered why everyone kept throwing stones. And Hollywood? It doesn't care. It just moves on to the next family, the next scandal, the next spectacle to consume. Because fame doesn't end, it just transfers. The Smiths' collapse wasn't just a Hollywood tragedy, it was a reflection of us, of how much we crave chaos dressed up as honesty, of how much we love to watch people break down as long as it makes for good entertainment. They gave us everything, their lives, their flaws, their pain, and we called it content. But maybe that's the real cautionary tale here, that the moment you start treating your life like a show, you stop being the main character. And in Hollywood, the spotlight never really belongs to you. It just shines long enough to remind you how fast it fades. But before we close this story, there's one more truth to face. One final scene that says it all. Because behind the chaos, the scandals, and the memes, there's a final lesson buried in the ashes of their fame. The Smiths didn't just show us how fame can destroy a family. They showed us something even darker. How easy it is to destroy yourself trying to stay famous. So what happens when you spend a lifetime chasing applause and the world stops clapping? That's the question the Smith family is still trying to answer. Because underneath the headlines, the memes, and the chaos, their story isn't really about fame. It's about the cost of it. The slap, the songs, the scandals. They weren't random explosions. They were symptoms of something deeper. A family that traded privacy for relevance and found out too late that once you sell your piece, you can't buy it back. Will spent decades building the perfect image, and when it finally cracked, there was nothing left behind it. Jada spent years chasing authenticity and ended up turning truth into performance. Their kids spent their youth trying to find themselves in a house where everything was already scripted. That's the real tragedy here. Not that they fell off, not that the internet turned on them, but that they don't seem to know who they are when no one's watching. And maybe that's the part that hits hardest, because we've all become a little bit like them, addicted to attention, terrified of being irrelevant, always performing even when no one's clapping. The Smith family just lived the extreme version of what so many people quietly feel. The pressure to stay visible, the fear of silence, the constant need to prove that you still matter. They became the mirror that Hollywood didn't want to look into. Proof that fame isn't a reward, it's a contract. One that demands everything. Your privacy, your sanity, and eventually, your soul. Because fame doesn't destroy you all at once. It takes you piece by piece. First, your privacy. Then, your peace. Then, your purpose. Until one day, you're left standing on stage, surrounded by fake smiles, fake friends. And if you're Will Smith, even fake crowds. And maybe that's the saddest part. That after everything, the Oscars, the albums, the interviews, the tears, the same man who once told the world to just smile through it ended up being the one who couldn't anymore. The Smiths were once a symbol of success. Now, they're a warning. Because in the end, fame isn't free. It looks glamorous. It feels powerful. But it always collects payment. And the Smith family paid in full. So the next time someone says they want to be famous, remember this story. Remember the laughter that turned into pity. The applause that turned into silence. The family that turned into a headline. Because the price of attention is everything.